All right, sorry about that. We had some technical problems. So next up we have Britta Gustafson talking about documentation inertia.
All right. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. I'm Britta, and this is what I've learned from reviving my community's volunteer developer documentation wiki. I'll explain how I ended up as a contributor, despite not being a developer at all. And then I'll share my strategies for encouraging volunteers to help with it, with a little bit of social engineering and a lot of friendliness. Pretty much all documentation projects could use some more enthusiasm, and I wanted to share what I've learned so far, because hopefully this will help you with your projects too. And there's an under construction GIF, because under construction GIFs are pretty cool, even now. They totally are. So for a few years, our wiki looked like this. It looks like a media wiki install. Okay, whatever. But it was sort of cryptic. It started with an outdated tagline, and then it had a list of ideas for what to add to this wiki, as if the wiki didn't have anything yet. It did actually have a lot of good pages. They were just sort of buried. But at least it was honest. It also said, "It is a real challenge for a beginner. Where to start?" Okay. But this is what it looks like now. Still looks like a media wiki install. Pretty standard. But it's so much more exciting now. There's an up-to-date statement of goals. There are lists of the best articles and the newest articles. There's a picture with an in-joke, just for fun. It makes sense to the developers. It probably doesn't make sense to anybody else. And there's a big getting started section. It's like it's alive. So what happened here? There's a lot of volunteers who helped make it happen. They're pretty awesome, so I listed some of them here. It's my shout out. I like them. But before I explain, it's probably helpful if you know what this community is. Where do these people come from? Why do they care about it? So I work for the tiny 3-person company that makes Cydia, which is the alternative to the App Store for jailbroken iPhones and other iOS devices. And this is the documentation for writing software for jailbroken iOS, because Apple's not going to document how to use their private APIs, so we have to do it. And what is jailbreaking, though? Some people know, some people don't. Let's say you have an iPhone, and you want to write some software that shows up on the lock screen, instead of just being a normal self-contained app. That's crazy. You can't do that. Apple just doesn't give you a way to do that. But wait a minute. This is a lock screen running custom software. Because what you can do is you can use this specialized security exploit that's available for free. You can just download it from the internet and put it on your phone. And this removes Apple's restrictions on the operating system. And then you can write crazy new software that adds new features and customizations to any part of iOS. And people can distribute or even sell the software in our little alternative to the App Store. And so all of these developers who work on this wiki, they write this stuff for fun, and they might make some money on it, but they don't work for us. They're not our employees, they're volunteers. Another example, you can write software that customizes icons in cool ways. But how do you get started with writing this kinds of crazy customizations? You'll probably want to learn about the tools and the libraries that people have written for doing this, such as by reading some documentation. That's usually a good start. But for a long time, we didn't have much documentation. You kind of had to just figure it out on your own. Maybe like ask some questions on IRC or something. And during this time, I started working for this company as a community manager. But I was just working on running support forums and doing user support, because I'm not a developer. You know, what do I know about developer documentation? Occasionally I would poke the developers and say like, oh, the wiki's looking a little neglected. Maybe you guys should do something about that. And they were like, okay, I guess so. Sure. That doesn't work. But here's the story. Last year, just for fun, I started contributing to this cool open source project called OpenHatch, which teaches people how to contribute to open source projects. I helped out by answering questions from developers about contributing, because I'm a support person at heart, so if I'm going to contribute to open source, I can do that by contributing to support. And I answered questions about how to read a bug tracker, how to submit a patch, how to find the right documentation for the project I wanted to work on, that kind of thing. But wait a minute, I'm helping developers with development questions. Wait a minute, it turns out I know something about helping developers. Okay, maybe I should actually join the developer IRC channels in my community, my work community, and see what I can do there too. Who knew? And okay, that developer wiki. I actually know a lot about building wikis if I think about it. I've been a Wikipedia contributor for like 12 years. I know how to edit a wiki. I don't know why I wasn't feeling qualified to do that. Okay, it was time to log into the dev wiki, click edit, and start fixing up that homepage. So that's what started my fight against inertia in my community, which says contributing to open source projects can give you a new perspective on your work and new skills, and you can practice them in a sort of low pressure environment where people, will often help you because they want you to volunteer on their project. And it's also really fun. So as an Open Hatch volunteer, if you have questions about being a new open source contributor, you can ask me. That's my plug. Okay. So now I'm going to go through this big list of strategies that I've learned while working on this dev wiki. Some of these will resonate for you and some won't, so I'm going to throw a whole bunch out there. My first step was just to show up and hang out with the developers and basically make friends with them. For me, this meant joining the IRC channels, the developer chat rooms. And if your community has an IRC channel, that's probably where your developers are hanging out. It's kind of fun. But this could be a mailing list, Twitter, forums, meetups, the engineer lunch table, whatever it is in your community or at your company. And you might start by asking the experienced developers to write things, since they know stuff. And that's great, if it works. But usually they're busy, or they don't know what to write. Or sometimes they just ignore you because, well, who are you anyway to tell them what to do? You're not a developer. Nah. But enthusiastic beginners are solid gold. They want documentation. They're looking for it, and they'll read whatever exists, if they can find it. And they ask questions that reveal what's missing. And they even ask redundant questions that show that something is hard to find, which is also useful to know. You can ask them, what was the search path that you used? And then you can go fix that, the way that they weren't finding the thing. And another thing, you can ask these beginners to write things down as they learn, because they look up to you, or to me, as a more established person in the community, even if you're really new too. They don't know better. And as they get more experienced, if you're lucky, they'll keep on contributing. And you can have a nice pipeline going on there. So I started out by noticing useful conversations in these developer chat rooms and very, very gently asking, would this be useful to put on the wiki? And it turned out that people had forgotten about the wiki. It was kind of outdated, it was kind of stale, it didn't seem very useful to them, so they weren't using it. And that meant they didn't know what was documented and what wasn't. And it didn't occur to them that they could actually fix it. So I had to start reminding them that maybe this specific, useful bit of information that people keep asking about would be useful to write down. And a few of them were actually like, okay, I can do that. It takes me a minute. Sure. But important in this is that I don't actually tell them what to do. I ask them very innocent, gentle questions. And here are examples of questions I've used when people have these impulses to not write documentation, which also happened a lot at the beginning. So I would hear, well, if people can't learn this part on their own, they probably can't build successful projects because this is difficult. So we really shouldn't write it down. Okay, but that gives nothing to beginners who really want to learn. So I asked, can you write a prerequisites list of what people should know before they start exploring on their own? And somehow that didn't feel like it would give everything away. So they actually started writing that, and it's really useful. Or people started saying, well, nobody pays attention to the documents, so we shouldn't bother writing them. Why should we waste our time? And I told them, and I was thinking, well, people will pay attention if we use the right teaching strategy. So I asked these volunteers, well, what problems do people run into if they don't read the docs? Let's write down advice for these people too, so that when they show up on IRC saying like, oh, blah, 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 clearly did not read anything before they got started. They're very exploratory learners. Then we actually have documentation for them that's more like oriented toward people who tried something and it didn't work. That was fun. And also something that happened is I would suggest to somebody that that's a good thing to write down. And they would say, I don't know enough to write this. And so I said, can you add a "this is missing" note to the right part of the wiki? And then magically, often in the next few days, somebody would fill out that spot. Because just having somebody point out that something is missing turns out to be really valuable. So as I was working on this, I noticed this is a marketing problem. I don't know how I didn't expect that, but it's a marketing problem. And marketing is not a bad word. It turns out that, so I'm trying to identify the value of this documentation thing. I'm trying to communicate that value to people who probably need it in order to get them to use it and contribute to it for other people. That's the definition of marketing. Weird. So the value of documentation is not obvious to everyone in your community. Sometimes you have to figure out how to sell it to them. And part of this, at least for us, was to make the homepage really enticing to click. You put the best articles way up front. You write a really grand tagline with like a great statement of goals. And I put a picture on the front. I gave it like a logo so that it had some kind of visual identity. Try to make it something for people to be proud of, make it pretty. And then another marketing thing was content marketing? I just helped build articles that people wanted and then promoted those articles. A good example is I helped with this giant table of open source projects that people could look at as example code. And this made developers in the community feel really great because their project was mentioned on the wiki. And this list felt valuable to people because there's this huge list of resources. And so they kept sharing it on Twitter. And this was also really easy for people to contribute to because all they had to do was log in and add their project, which meant lots of people signed up for a wiki account. Yes. And this list was actually outside the normal scope of our documentation wiki, but that was okay. It attracted people to the wiki, and it turns out when people hear about it, some of them are going to want to start contributing. And the next thing with all these people who are newly signed up is it turned out they didn't ordinarily find it fun to work on documentation. They like writing code. Writing code is fun for them. They're discovering new things, and very importantly, they're releasing them to an audience who wants them, and an audience who says, yes, please give me more features, here's all my support problems. Like, okay, maybe support isn't that fun, but generally releasing software was fun for these people. You have this really good feedback loop. You know people are using your work. But contributing to the wiki felt very lonely. Even if like 3 people read your article that afternoon, you had no idea. Nobody said thanks because, you'd have to log into the wiki and click edit and know how to edit and know how to write it on a talk page. Nobody was thanking anyone for actually working on the wiki. So I wanted to show people that people are reading this wiki. And to start off, whenever anyone added anything, I went in and copy edited it or added some formatting. This was an immediately visible way to prove to writers that somebody read their work and adding some feedback loop to the wiki process. And this turned out to also help people feel more confident in contributing because a lot of these developers speak English as their 3rd or 4th language, or writing just isn't their main skill that they've practiced recently. And a funny thing in my community is that a lot of our developers are 15. They're high schoolers. They're not necessarily very proficient in technical writing yet. And they appreciated getting some friendly feedback on their writing, very polite feedback. And I added, made sure to add syntax highlighting to their code snippets so it looked great. They liked that. And part of this was nobody likes hanging out in a ghost town. Okay, some people like hanging out in ghost towns, but they're kind of weird. I mean, they're cool, but they're weird. On a wiki, if there have been no edits for the past month, and you're going to think that nobody looks at the wiki, so why bother throwing your words into the void? So one thing I did is I make sure that the recent changes page always has something on it, something in the past few days. If it's just some copy editing, it's fine. It just shows that people are working on it. And I list the new articles on the homepage. It's great if the homepage keeps changing with new stuff so that it always feels fresh and active. It always feels like there's something new here that I should check on, and if I add something, I'll get featured on the homepage too. And you make it more fun by thanking people. If you write an article and nobody says thank you, that is the definition of a thankless task. And readers aren't necessarily going to write thanks, even if they appreciate it. So that's something that I do. I write thanks to the writers on their wiki talk pages, on IRC, on Twitter, everywhere. And writing thanks to these people, volunteers, publicly on my work Twitter account as part of the company shows that this is a priority for the community and for jailbreaking in general, to write stuff down. And what's funny is that by writing it on Twitter, who knew? You're promoting the wiki again. Ah, nice. And I've been reading about writing thanks really effectively. And one thing you need to do is do it right away. Like the next day after somebody writes something, you thank them. And to be really specific about what they did, that was awesome. And to do it publicly. It makes people feel good. And it's super easy, super cheap. It's the best. It also turned out that some of the people in my community felt like they needed permission to contribute to the wiki. These are often the very best people because they're very polite and they're very cautious and they're very careful and they don't want to mess it up, Or sometimes they don't feel like they're qualified to write. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome. They don't realize what they know. So I'm there hanging out on IRC every day to be a person people can ask if adding something would be a good idea. And of course I'm always like, yes, do it, go ahead. It's okay if it's not perfect, we'll fix it. Just being there to give permission turns out to be useful. And there's something that surprised me recently. The docs system needs docs. Who knew? We had a jailbreaking conference last month, and I ran a little workshop for working on our wiki. And even though these volunteers are amazingly brilliant developers who can read assembly code and reverse engineer iOS and write really complicated programs, they were asking me questions about MediaWiki syntax, like just editing syntax. Because it turns out that MediaWiki is a little frustrating and confusing for everyone in the whole world, no matter how amazing you are. It's a little confusing. You need big cheat sheet links to help people edit the wiki and explanations of how to edit the wiki, even if you think your community is absolutely brilliant, because MediaWiki is annoying. I love it, but it's annoying. This part is a classic bit of wiki social engineering. You leave around a few obvious mistakes and easy tasks, like typos, somewhere in the wiki, because that will entice people to click edit and start contributing, even if they haven't done that before, because they're like, oh, that's easy, I can fix that. And once you get them to log in and make an account, that's the first step. It's good. So another thing I've done is you make a list of, a documented list of bite-sized tasks for people to do, easy stuff for people to add, for example, contributing to the list of open source projects. And I put this in a really obvious place on the homepage to help people get started. Okay. Another sort of funny social engineering thing is writing bad first drafts as motivation for people to fix stuff. One of the best developers I know told me this recently, that if I want him to help with a wiki, I should write some really terrible documentation myself, even as a non-developer, about something, even if I don't fully understand it, because I'm not going to fully understand it. I just do what I can, and then I show him what I did, and he's going to be like, oh my God, and totally go fix it. He said that's how to motivate him. It's great advice, like we were talking about yesterday, like ignorance is strength. And this is also, again, why beginners are solid gold. Experienced developers often have, no idea what actually needs to be written. They need a draft or an outline or something to get started with that isn't a blank page, and beginners are perfect for writing that. And me, as a beginner, in a funny way. Because I start wondering, well, is this going to end up with me becoming a developer too? Uh-oh. Because, what if I learned some Objective-C so I could just skip all of this work and just write the documentation by myself? That sounds easier. This is a strategy that I have not tried yet. It's just fixing it myself. And it would be kind of hilarious. So we'll see. So thanks. That's what I have. And if you also have volunteers and you try to motivate them, I want to know what you do. So you should tell me what you got, too. All right. Thanks.